Have you ever felt it but couldn't quite explain it? There's something different about people who grew up in the 1990s. Not louder, not quieter, just steadier. When they listen, they don't rush to reply. When silence appears, they don't scramble to fill it. When they're present, it doesn't feel performative, it feels anchored. At first glance, it's easy to label this as personality. Maybe they're introverted, maybe they're laid back, maybe they just aren't absorbed in digital culture. But that explanation misses something deeper. This isn't about temperament, it's about timing. People born in the 1990s didn't simply grow up in a different era. They grew up during a neurological transition humanity had never experienced before. They learned how to exist before constant stimulation became normal, and then had to adapt when speed, visibility, and immediacy took over everything. So what you're sensing isn't detachment, and it isn't nostalgia, it's regulation. A nervous system that learned how to sit with itself before it learned how to broadcast itself. And once you notice that difference, it becomes impossible to unsee, because it shows up everywhere. In how they relate to silence, to technology, to connection, and even to time itself. People who grew up in the 1990s occupy a psychological position that neither older nor younger generations fully understand. They are not purely analog, they are not fully digital. They were shaped in the narrow passage between the two. Their early years unfolded in a world that still moved at a human pace. Communication required intention. If you wanted to see someone, you made plans in advance. If you wanted information, you searched deliberately. If you missed something, it was simply gone. There was no replay button for childhood. Then suddenly, not gradually, but abruptly, everything accelerated. The internet didn't gently integrate. It surged. Speed became expectation. Availability became obligation. Visibility became currency. And this shift happened while their identities were still forming. That matters psychologically, because adolescence is when the nervous system is mapping the world, learning what is normal, what is safe, what is required. And for this generation, normal changed mid-development. That's what it means to be a bridge generation. A bridge does not belong fully to either side. It exists to connect what came before with what came after. And connection, while valuable, is demanding. People from the 1990s learned to code switch between worlds. They can move fluently through digital spaces. They understand online language, timing, and tone. But they also carry a memory of depth that didn't require documentation. They understand convenience, but they remember cost. They value innovation, but they remember what friction once protected. Living between these systems builds flexibility, but it also creates quiet tension. Because the two worlds operate by different rules. And navigating both shapes how they relate not just to technology, but to attention, intimacy, and even self-worth. They were never meant to choose a side, they were shaped to carry both. For this generation, childhood unfolded without an audience. There was no permanent archive trailing every mistake, no instant playback of embarrassing moments, no expectation that joy had to be shared to be valid. If something happened, it lived once, fully, and then dissolved. Saturday morning cartoons aired once and were gone. Family gatherings existed in memory, not feeds. Embarrassment faded instead of being preserved. And this shaped something subtle but powerful in the nervous system. Presence wasn't mindfulness practice, it was necessity. When moments cannot be saved, the mind learns to stay with them. Attention settles, experience completes itself. There isn't a part of the brain splitting off to think about how it looks, how it will be received, or how it should be framed. This isn't nostalgia, it's developmental psychology. A nervous system that matures without constant observation becomes internally anchored. It doesn't require proof to trust that something mattered. It doesn't need performance to feel real. So when endless documentation arrived, this generation already carried a different baseline. They could use the tools, but they didn't depend on them. Silence didn't feel empty. Moments didn't need witnesses. That early environment trained a kind of quiet attention, one that remains with what is happening instead of dividing itself between experience and its representation. And that difference still echoes today in how they listen, how they remember, and how fully they inhabit the room they're in. Boredom is another forgotten teacher. For those who grew up in the 1990s, boredom wasn't something to escape instantly. There was no algorithm ready to rescue attention. No endless scroll waiting in a pocket. When boredom arrived, it stayed, and that forced a decision, endure discomfort, or create something from it. This is where imagination expanded. Empty afternoons turned into invented games, daydreams filled quiet car rides, inner conversations replaced external noise. Over time, something deeper formed. emotional self-regulation. When there is nothing to distract you, the nervous system learns how to settle itself. It learns that discomfort rises, peaks, and fades on its own. That skill rarely gets named, but it shapes everything. It allows someone to be alone without panic, to wait without agitation, to feel restless without immediately numbing it. Today, boredom is treated like a glitch. But for this generation, boredom was training. It taught them that inner life could hold attention on its own. And that's why many people from the 1990s don't fear quiet the way others might. Silence doesn't signal emptiness, it signals space, and space is possibility. Waiting shaped them too. You waited for movies to return to the video store. You waited for songs to come on the radio. You waited to save enough money for a single CD. Desire did not lead directly to fulfillment. Time existed in between. Psychologically, this builds something powerful. Delayed gratification is not just about patience. It's about trust. Trust that desire can survive delay. Trust that anticipation deepens meaning. Trust that process is not loss. When rewards come after effort and time, the brain learns that waiting is survivable, even valuable. That carries into adulthood. People shaped this way don't panic when progress is slow. They tolerate middle phases. They allow relationships to develop gradually. They don't demand instant intensity to feel secure. They are not indifferent. They are not passive. They simply learn that not everything meaningful arrives on demand. Perhaps the most misunderstood trait of this generation is their relationship with silence. From the outside, it can look like distance. A pause before responding. A comfort with conversational gaps. But this isn't emotional absence. It's emotional fluency. They learned silence before they learned stimulation. Silence wasn't awkward. It was neutral, sometimes grounding. You could sit beside someone without speaking and still feel connected. That early wiring created nervous systems that don't equate quiet with rejection. At the same time, they became fluent in digital life. They know how to navigate platforms, messages, and online dynamics. They are not technologically behind, they are bilingual. They can move between presence and performance, between depth and speed, between engagement and retreat, and because of that, their quiet often carries intention. They don't confuse constant communication with closeness. They understand that connection doesn't disappear when words pause, it simply changes form. Adaptability became their defining strength. They adjusted as the world recalibrated itself. They learned new systems, new norms, new expectations. But adaptability carries a cost. When you grow up learning to handle things internally, you also learn to minimize your needs. You become skilled at regulating yourself, but less practiced at signaling when something is heavy. So resilience becomes visible, strain becomes private. Others see calm and assume ease. They see flexibility and assume effortlessness. But constant recalibration is tiring, living between two operational speeds, remembering depth while functioning in acceleration, requires ongoing adjustment. They are not disconnected, they are managing complexity, and that quiet complexity can feel like aging faster than the calendar suggests. Many people born in the 1990s carry a subtle sense of having witnessed something profound, the disappearance of one world and the birth of another. They remember human pace. They remember undivided attention. They remember privacy as default, not setting. That memory adds weight, not bitterness, not cynicism, weight. A kind of emotional gravity that comes from understanding how fragile normal really is. They don't chase every trend, not from resistance, but discernment. They know how quickly new becomes ordinary, and how quietly ordinary disappears. Feeling older than your age isn't dysfunction, it's what happens when you've lived through transition with awareness. This is not a story about one generation being better, it's a story about contrast. People born in the 1990s are not slower than the world. The world simply learned how to move faster. They are not distant. They learned regulation before stimulation became constant. What shaped them was exposure to two different realities, and the responsibility of holding both. If you recognize yourself here, there is nothing wrong with your rhythm. You are not behind. You carry a pace that formed in a different environment, and that pace still has value. And if you didn't grow up this way, understanding this can deepen empathy. Because what looks like distance is often balance. What looks like slowness is often steadiness. If this reflection resonated with you, you're not alone here. This space is about exploring the quieter psychological patterns that shape how we adapt, connect, and remain human in accelerating systems. If you found meaning in this, consider subscribing so we can continue these deeper conversations together. And I'd love to hear from you. What's one 1990s memory that still influences how you move through the world today? Share it in the comments. Sometimes remembering isn't about nostalgia, it's about understanding who we became.